All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of NAGDCA Connect. My name is Matt Petersen. I'm NAGDCA's Executive Director. I'm excited about today's topic. It's a different take on a very familiar theme for us. We talk a lot about automatic enrollment, about the benefits of getting people saving in your plans. But today's conversation is going to be a deeper discussion about some of the bigger picture benefits of getting your employees to save early, save often, how automatic savings in a DC plan can help close some of those persistent savings disparities we all know so well, be they race or ethnicity or gender, some things that we'd all love to solve. So joining me today for this important conversation are some really great friends of the organization and people you all have known for quite some time. First, I want to introduce Beth Cleary. Beth is the Executive Director of the Milwaukee 457 plan. Welcome, Beth. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
Angela Harrell is the Senior Vice President and Chief Diversity and Corporate Impact Officer at Voya. Hey, Angela. Good to see you. And Tom Armstrong is the head of the Voya Behavioral Finance Institute for Innovation. Welcome, Tom. Good to see you. All right, there is a lot to cover today. We want to get to it quickly, but before we do, I wanted to get a few things out of the way. We're recording this presentation. It will be emailed along with a copy of the slides to all of the registrants today. So you will get a copy of this at the end. Be sure about that. I promise you will get a copy. Usually one of the main questions that we get. I also want to let you know that you will be muted for the duration of this webinar. Please submit any questions you have throughout the presentation in the Q&A box found in the menu at the bottom of your screen. Your questions are only going to be visible to the speakers, so please feel free to send those anytime. We'll get to as many of them as possible throughout the presentation. We also have the chat feature open, so if you can't hear us or if something's going wrong with the presentation, please feel free to send chat to the panelists or myself. So just so you know, nobody else can see those. So it'll just be the panelists that'll be able to check those out. I also want to give a quick thank you to our visionary and our premier sponsors. So you can see them here. They are NAGDCA is a mission-driven nonprofit. Our goal is to be the collective voice of the public sector DC plan sponsor community. We couldn't meet that mission without the generous support of companies you see listed here. So thank you to our sponsors for all that you do, including Voya, our guests today. So let's get going. I mentioned that we'll be thinking about automatic enrollment through the different lens today. And I think it's one that's very beneficial to you as plan sponsors, especially if you're trying to make the case for adding automatic enrollment to your plan or helping explain the impact of auto enrollment if your plan is already using it. So Beth and I have talked about this a lot for her program for a long time. The data that she has helps her tell the story of her plan successes. So you're going to hear a lot about that today. It's really pretty incredible, something that I think you'll all benefit from hearing. So Beth and her partners at Voya will do a lot of the talking today. I'll get out of your way. I thought it would be helpful, though, if we started with a poll. So I'm going to start with a poll. And you can see it, hopefully, now on your screen. The poll question, we just kind of like to level set a little bit to see your interest from the plan sponsor side, from the service provider side. If you're looking at your clients as well, have you used some of these factors in thinking about how your plan is designed? So have you used race or ethnicity or some other demographic data to identify opportunities to improve your plan design today? So that's what we're going to be thinking about a lot as we get into the discussion with Beth and get into the talk about her plan. So we'll let you have a minute to fill that out. And as you do, Beth, I'm going to turn it over to you because you led the City of Milwaukee. And I know that your predecessor, Maggie Dawn, was very heavily involved in initiating this process, and then you picked it up for her. But you've really focused on addressing things like racial disparities in savings, gender disparities in savings gaps. Why was auto-enrollment important in that process? Why was it important to you, and why did you take the time that you did to make those changes to your plan?
Yeah, great question. So I was reviewing our timeline. I'll just give you a little bit of history of how we got here. So I actually served as a trustee on our 457 plan once upon a time. And it was during the time actually that there was a 2012 NAGDCA conference where a keynote speaker was Melody Hobson from Ariel Investments. And Melody was talking about the state of retirement in the United States. And through her discussion, she identified these issues of the disparity gaps, and she encouraged plans to look closer and drill down and to understand some of the metrics about how are you doing when it comes to race, ethnicity, and gender, and trying to address those, or even just being aware of, do you have disparity gaps? Do you have uneven numbers when it comes to categorically looking at it from those demographics? And she really, if you haven't heard her speak, she has one of the most compelling stories. Her own personal journey is one of extreme financial insecurity when she grew up with a single mom, youngest of 6 kids. She's experienced eviction. She's experienced not knowing if they'd have enough gas in their car to get to school. And she hated it. And she wanted to do anything she could to not ever feel like this again. So she threw herself into, her career. And it's also, she's been extremely successful with what she does philanthropically with her investment management firm, the number of boards that she serves on. But she also advocates and she speaks to this whenever and however she will have an audience. And she was talking about this topic at a time where our country wasn't really, right? So the last couple of years, we've really started to ramp up looking at and trying to understand some perspectives and some disparities through these lenses. But her presentation was very compelling. My predecessor invited her. She was also a trustee on our board as well at the time, before she became ED. And she invited Melody to speak to stakeholders within the city and county of Milwaukee. She brought her in the year 2013, the spring of 2013. She presented on the floor of the Chamber Council, and we had public-private stakeholders from around the city, the county. And I share this with you because it's really important that third-party validation, understanding from the perspective of what people have to tell you outside of your own organization, that helps a lot, whether it's data, whether it's having presentation. And the other thing is that it got everybody on the same page as to this being something that we really do want to look at. So the board went back to our board conference room. We looked at our mission, and it basically said that our goal is to help prepare people for retirement, to retire on time with dignity, after their service to the city. And so we started to analytically slice and dice our data and ask ourselves, are we doing that for everyone? How are we doing when it comes to race and ethnicity? How are we doing with gender? How are we doing with age quartile, salary quartile? And just kind of done like a 360 on that. And at the same time, we also were taking note of the best practices that are out there for plan design. And we partnered with our plan consultant at the same time that we switched over and we started to work with Voya. So our plan consultant is Kalen, and they were extremely instrumental in setting us up with our plan design changes. And we did a lot of an overhaul. We added target date funds, a new investment lineup, and we added auto-enrollment and re-enrollment. And re-enrollment's really important too, to keep in mind. And when we did that, it came to fruition at the same time that we switched over to Voya as our current record keeper. So I swooped in right when all that transition happened. The dust was settling, tying up loose ends. And what we started to benchmark in 2013, actually, we started to capture that officially in 2015. So the pre-transition, and then quarterly, we've been benchmarked ever since. And we made a promise to our common council that every year, annually, I'd be going back to the finance and personnel, and I would be reviewing these stats with them because it's something that it matters to them. Now, I'm not going to lie, it wasn't easy. It was an uphill battle to get everybody's oar in the water and going in the same direction, and to have the stakeholders on the same page. And I know that every plan is different, whether you're a state plan and you have to go through legislation, or maybe there's some impediments when you legally can't do auto enrollment, or if you do, it has to be through the legislation or the collective bargaining. There's different paths, and you guys all know your own path. But I do want to encourage, and I know Matt's going to hit on this later, to really understand the resources that NAGDA offers when it comes to understanding that bigger picture of where we are as a nation in terms of auto enrollment. There's an incredible nationwide heat map that tells you by states who allows for it. So you can kind of get a sense. And if you have a neighbor state or a municipality, you could always reach out to them and talk to them. And the other thing that I don't mean to steal your thunder, Matt, but there's also an auto enrollment toolkit that NAGDA has put together. And I'm going to encourage, it just popped in my head, Matt, but I'm going to encourage that we include this Voya perspective paper in it as well to point to as a data point, because that's something we're going to get into. So when we started to benchmark for this, I had no idea until I think it was a year and a half ago. Tom, who you'll hear from in a moment, he is Voya's certified data geek. And I say that with all respect. Every organization, I'm sure, has a Tom. So if you don't know who that Tom is, find your Tom and work with him, because he will dig in and he gets really excited to slice and dice the data. So the thing that was really interesting about this is I had no idea that us benchmarking this over time allowed us to demonstrate and show the disparity gaps changing. This is the tide that rise all boats. And it's kind of an unintended consequence that we were delighted to see. And then as we do our enrollment process, and just a quick background here. So if you're not in the plan, or if you're saving under 3%, then you get subject to the auto enrollment process. And every year during open enrollment, you have a choice, but you get swooped back into the plan. So from, again, a behavioral economics standpoint, it gives another opportunity to get in front of you, to think about it actively, and to make that specific choice. So when we started to look at this, and then, working with Tom, what's fascinating is being part of this auto enrollment process really had another great unintended consequence, and that is freeing up capacity, because we were no longer chasing enrollments, which is a huge lion's share of what I know a lot of plans do. It's what we used to do. And so when you have that mechanism, and by the way, the auto enrollment population every year, it keeps shrinking because we keep getting more and more people back into the plan. But when you don't have to chase enrollments, that's when you can focus on other things. And I'll get into that a little bit later. I know I'm going way beyond your question, Matt, in terms of answering the history, but yeah, that's a bit of the backstory. So I'll turn it back to you.
No, I think that's really great. And, one thing to just emphasize really quickly is that it's, if you are going through something of a process to try to get auto enrollment, it can be a really good argument. And it can be a really good argument for those who already have it, to say, hey, here's the impact that our, this program that we're all putting time into, that costs us some money, maybe costs us some effort. Here's a different kind of impact other than just the one that we always talk about, which is getting, people in the plan and dollars in the plan. So I'm going to end the poll real quick, and I'll share the results. I think these are interesting for a couple of reasons. A lot of people are already looking at it. You can see that 10 out of the 24 who responded said yes, they're already using demographic data to improve their plan design. But more people are saying they're either trying to, or they don't have the data, or they're interested in it, or they don't have the data. And I think those are some things that we're going to get into in a little bit when we talk with Tom and Angela. But Angela, I want to go to you real quick. Beth's one client, a very compelling story. We're going to talk about her story a lot here today, but you see a lot of clients. Are you seeing this with your other clients? Are there a lot of folks out there? It looks, like there's a fair number even on the call, but is this a kind of a broadly interesting topic that you see plans starting to move towards?
Hi. So nice to be here having this conversation. There are so many organizations, when we start having these conversations about what the data can tell us and how there is this variance that you don't necessarily understand until you start getting into the details, you can see the interest instantly peaked. I think particularly when you're talking about public plans and clients of ours within the sector, absolutely. And part of that is because of that desire to really make sure that there is some equity in terms of those opportunities within their plans. I mean, we got into this work not necessarily thinking about how it could spread to our clients, but really because we were focused on Voya. We were focused on the Voya plan. You know, it was back in 2020. We actually had a group of employees from our employee resource group come to us and say, you know, we're concerned. We see the pandemic, we see racial injustice, we see that, you know, there are obviously differences in terms of how communities are experiencing what is such a hard year economically, financially, from a health perspective. We've got some recommendations. And one of those recommendations was to really start to dig into generational wealth gaps, to really understand behaviors in terms of health utilization, health plan utilization, 401k, et cetera, et cetera. So our work in this area actually started with a look in and a focus in. And as Tom will share with you, if you look at our plan, it looks like there's great participation, right? And there is. However, there is a difference in terms of demographics and race, not only in participation, but also in savings rates. We wanted to figure out what's underneath, what's happening. And so while we'll talk about some of the levers that can be pulled to start to get that variance to narrow, and as Beth said, to help all boats really rise, there is also the work, I think, that for those of us who have as their purpose helping everyone have that better financial future. I mean, that's literally Voya's purpose. Using the skills and the talents that we have to start to have more of a kind of surgical approach to how we help people have those better financial futures is super important. I often say we've got an individual on our team who we work with who does lots of research with Kantar, and you know, financial stress that ranks right up there with death, war, in terms of the stresses on individuals, right? And so if we can do things through our plan, through education, through the way that plan design happens, and then also bring clients into the fold, because that's really the only way that we can really see movement across our greater society and economy, is when we're doing this work together. And it's meaningful. And we're already starting to see a great deal of change and movement. Beth, as you said, the resident data geek, there's nobody like Tom Armstrong. And so anyone out there who does not have a resident geek, you can't have Tom. He's all ours. But I'll let him kind of illustrate what some of this data told us about directionally what we kind of thought we knew. But when you see it numerically, charts, bars, graphs, you see that it is a stark difference that can't be okay if you're about equity.
Yeah. And just real quick, I think it's fascinating. So to be clear, you're looking internally at, you know, at people who work at Voya.
That's how we started.
And then
that's how we started. Yeah.
Tom, I don't think you have to call yourself a data geek. I think you could go with data maestro or whatever.
All right, I'm going to embrace it, I think. So yeah, after both two people I respect and holds near and dear to my heart, Angela and Beth, calling me data geek, I think that is just a good compliment.
You just have to go with it at some point, right?
I'm just going to go with it. Exactly right. So yeah, no, thanks for the tee up. I don't know if I'm worthy of the comments, but I'll say, you know, the cool thing about working with Angela, Beth, and honestly, you know, many people at Voya, quite frankly, many folks in the industry, is that folks care, right? We care, all of us do. I'm sure everyone on this phone really cares about the employees that they serve. And as Angela said, it's part of our purpose. It's, you know, together we fight for everyone's opportunity, not just some, not just a few. We really want a better financial future for all those that we serve. So with that purpose and with the sort of the mission to go and help our own employees, we then started talking to sponsors and employers like Beth and a number of others about, hey, if you can share a little bit more data with us, we believe we can do something special here. We believe we can give you a new lens to look at all of your employees and fully see them across gender, race, and ethnicity. And so we did that. We talked to a number of sponsors. In the data study that I'm going to talk about, it was 6 sponsors representing 163,000 employees across the various racial and ethnic groups. And we really studied 3 things. We looked at plan health, so the basics of participation and savings rates, et cetera. We also looked at engagement, though, and financial wellness, because we kind of know this is a multidimensional problem. We might be able to get people to save a bit more in their retirement or participate, but then we also want to look at, do they have other financial stresses? Going back to Angela's comment earlier, financial stress is real, and that can manifest itself into some things at the workplace that are not always great. It can lead to a number of negative things in your family life. So we really wanted to look more broadly also, in addition to the sort of retirement space, at some of these other financial wellness drivers. So with that as the tee up to this data study, if we kind of flip to the next page, what we'll do is we'll share with you just really high level results, right? Like there's a whole data study and a whole set of packages out there that we'll make available that you can kind of dig through. If you're like me as a data geek, you may find some of those other data dimensions interesting. But at a high level, what we found is there are some gaps. And so even in the plans within this data set that looked super healthy, some might celebrate 90, 95% participation, we found differences. And so when we look at this chart, I know there's a lot of data on the page as written by the data geek, but what I want to focus your attention on is if we look at first at the far left-hand graph there, the participation rate data. So across the 6 plans, the 163,000 employees in the study, we saw 62% participation in the Asian population, 66% participation in the white community, 53% in the Black African American community, and 45% participation in Hispanic Latino communities. And so you can see there's a 13 or so percentage point variance there between Black African American and white, and even a larger variance in the Hispanic and Latino population. And that gap holds true across the savings dimension. You can look at those savings rates. Again, we see a pretty sizable difference. And then again, we see that difference within the Black African American and Hispanic and Latino communities when it comes to average balance as well. Now, what I will say, and Matt and I had a discussion about this as we were talking about this sort of content and the research we did, some initially came to a conclusion before further deeply studying the data that, well, this is just a proxy for salary. And the reality is that we deeply looked at that. And when we controlled for salary, and when we carved kind of all of the various audiences up into the various salary segments, we still saw these gaps held true. So even in $30,000 to $50,000, $50,000 to $70,000, and so forth, we continuously would see lower participation rates, lower savings rates, and lower balances up until about $120,000 to $150,000, at which point we start to see things close, but not completely. So this is a problem not just for lower paid workers, not just for the sort of middle of the salary spectrum. We actually really have an opportunity to solve for something that's a bit more complex than quote unquote just the salary angle, which is a real thing, right? But at the end of the day, even when controlling for salary, this is an opportunity to solve for.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because that's kind of your default, right? Because you go, well, women make less or minorities make less, and so that explains a lot of that away. And I'm glad you looked into that, and it was really compelling that even broken down by salary, these things still persist, which is kind of incredible. Yeah, right. It's more challenging then, because that's not the easy answer, right? So then we have to dig a little bit deeper, but it was something that we deeply looked at. The other thing, before I get to, I'll call it a little bit of a bright spot, because I feel like now I'm a little bit of a doom and gloom data geek, which I don't want to be doom and gloom. I do want to just point out one other kind of larger opportunity that we found. And so we talked earlier about this is sort of like a multi-dimensional problem that we wanted to study. And part of that is looking broadly at financial wellness. And when we looked across a number of different measures of financial wellness, emergency savings is the one I happen to highlight here, but we
kind of saw, again, a consistent pattern emerge across those different pillars of financial wellness. We see here again that, yes, emergency funds is a problem for all of the race and ethnicities and all the different groups that we've studied. And that's been well publicized in the media and other research papers that we've been involved with. But we see that there's even a much higher percentage of Black African Americans, 7 out of 10, and nearly 7 out of 10 Hispanic and Latinos, not having adequate emergency savings in this data set is certainly something that we take seriously. And we have to, again, then weigh how much do we index on getting more people in the plan when maybe they don't have an adequate emergency savings fund. So let's make sure we're designing solutions and strategies and engagement techniques that really help to solve more broadly for the bigger financial wellness challenge that we're trying to overcome. So if we go to the next page, and then I promise we'll defer to someone other than me to talk about data, but we just wanted to kind of set the stage for some of these key findings. This was some of the bright spots, right? So many of us have been in this industry for a while. We know that through behavioral economics research, through some really preeminent research done by Dick Thaler and Shlomo Bernatzi and many other smarter folks than I in the academic space years and years ago, that auto features work, right? We know that, we've seen it demonstrated, but we really, when you start to then break down within this data set, what did we find for variability in things like participation rate when looking across auto-enroll plans and non-auto-enroll plans? And we found some really big differences that are really impactful. So on the left-hand side, we look at all of the plans and the participants that are eligible for or not eligible for auto-enroll, so non-auto-enroll plans. And not only are we seeing what we expect to see in terms of much lower participation rates on an average basis, but we see an 18 percentage point variance in participation between Black African American and and whites, right? So 49% participation of white employees in a non-auto enroll plan, 31% participation of Black African Americans in those non-auto enroll plans, and nearly the same gap with Hispanic and Latinos versus their white peers. When we go to the right side of the page in the graph, we then see those gaps close significantly. Not only is participation significantly higher in Black African American, Hispanic, and Latino populations, but I think more importantly, we only now see a 3 percentage point or 2 percentage point variance in those same communities. So this is further evidence and proof that these auto features work. There's a lot of work we know it takes, though, to get these implemented. We know that there's, in some cases, state legislators, there's government involved. We understand that that's not always a solution, and we'll talk about some other ideas we have when some of those things are not able to be done. But we do think that this is a pretty big tool in the toolkit, if you will, of being able to start to help close for some of those gaps.
Yeah, and you know, we've spent a lot of time trying to help plans. Beth mentioned a lot of tools that we've developed, an auto enrollment toolkit. We have a map on the website. If you're not sure, you know, if you're a plan that isn't sure of your laws, we've dug through all the laws. We're willing to help any plan out there that is interested in making the case for auto enrollment. But Beth, you know, in Milwaukee, you all did that work, and it was tough, I think, to actually get it across the line, which I think a lot of our members, you know, that story is really of interest to our members. So can you tell us just a little more about, you know, kind of what you did to get there, and then what you've seen from, you know, from the results in your plan so far?
Sure. Yes, it was a heavy lift for sure. And, you know, it's all about the stakeholders, identifying who they are, communicating and having a compelling narrative to illustrate why this power tool of a design change is so helpful. The two biggest things I would say, like I mentioned before, is capacity. It frees you up. You can focus on other things. And the other thing is looking at it from closing all the gaps. So coming at it from that perspective, I think, especially now that we've got data out there that 5-6 years ago there wasn't, I think that's probably the biggest way you want to do that in terms of start that conversation. There is, as I'm sure a lot of people have gone through or might anticipate, there's the whole concern about like, isn't this paternalistic? Aren't we trying to cram this down someone's throat? Well, the biggest thing is that there's choice, and part of the process too, like I said, that third-party validation, if you can bring someone in, or if you could look at a report. And I also want to mention, and I can't emphasize this enough, because I know a lot of our membership for NAGDA are plan sponsors or administrators, but also we have a lot of trustees, and are probably in the audience as well. And bringing the conversation to our stakeholders. Remember, that was a trustee that did that after going to a NAGDA conference. So I just want to encourage and empower trustees to realize that if you feel compelled to run with this, work with your plan administrator and see what can be done for that. I know that there's a question out there that was asked about the auto-enrollment process. It's every year it's an education, and we send out communications. And like I said, it keeps shrinking, that population. We have a little over 7,000 active employees that are eligible for the plan. And that re-enrollment population that is subject to that, again, they aren't in the plan or they're saving less than 3%. I think the last year it was down to about a little over 300 people. So it started out like in the 700s and it keeps shrinking. And so I think the other thing that I would encourage, if and when you're thinking about this, is, and this is something, a challenge I feel like as a community we should all be stepping up to. If you can, really grab that data and find a way to get it to your record keeper. And it's also really important from an aggregate basis for us to understand the trends and to tell the story of what's going on with all of our public plan participants from the standpoint of the Pearl database. Because right now, we've been able to work on some perspective papers. We did one on public plans and women in retirement, and it was really insightful because there are unique attributes specific to the public plans that we work with. But I was on the committee that had helped, like the advisory committee when the Pearl started. And one of the questions we said, okay, so now what can we do for race and ethnicity in terms of a perspective paper? And the response was, well, we can only do that if we have the data. And right now we don't get that data, those data points from a lot of the plans. So, I think that's a place where we can all start and really understand that picture more and more. If we can all individually, work with whoever it is that does our demographics file feed to say, what is it that we would need to do to capture this? And we look at it on an aggregate basis. The other thing I would also emphasize is from a financial wellness standpoint, again, freeing up capacity so you can focus on education and also getting a one-on-one audience, whether it's, I know, some people are scattered throughout the state, but you can still be creative and do one-on-ones through Zoom, meetings or telephone as well if you can't do in person. We've started to also benchmark when people engage in the financial wellness, because we have a program that incentivizes people who do presentations and consultations. And we have looked at the same metrics, which is plan participation and contribution rate. And we show on an annual basis that those that are plugged in through the incentivized financial wellness, like they're actually doing those presentations and having those conversations, they have a higher participation rate and they have a higher contribution rate. So when you can get, thank you. When you can get in front of your employees, any opportunity you have, it's going to move the dial. It's going to move the meter. And this goes back to that broader conversation that we talk a lot about. Financial wellness looks different to everybody, but really it comes down to financial literacy for a lot of people. We all know that a ton of our participants have basic, if not zero financial literacy background. And when you can find ways to get in front of them with a presentation or a one-on-one consultation, or maybe you have in-house benefit counselors, for example, that you could utilize. But if you can do things like that, then people are going to feel empowered to ask questions that they might not realize that they have a resource to do that. And especially if it's someone who's there as an educator, who's not trying to sell them a product. And that's something that we are neutral on. And we can really help have those conversations, help understand what it is that their goals are and how are they going to get there. And I know one of the questions Rhonda had asked was about if we focus on income replacement. Like I know a lot of plans that's one of their perspectives that they look at. And it is something that we look at. It's not like an exclusive lens that we drive a lot of our goals after or model them after, but we definitely utilize, and I'm sure other record keepers have a similar tool, but Voya has My Orange Money, where it starts to look at that big picture of what other retirement income sources are out there, pension, if you have Social Security available to you, any outside funds, and looking at that bigger picture. And then once you have a percentage, you can have that broader conversation. And then there's another tool that I would say, I just want to emphasize too, is there's this financial wellness assessment tool. And this is another feature that, Tom, you changed your name. It was Data Geek. You changed it back to your actual name. But Tom has looked at and sliced and diced that information, because we have a financial wellness assessment tool that we really try to funnel our participants into taking. And that's a way to understand and help assess that broad base understanding of their individual financial wellness portfolio, and not just retirement, but looking at things like protection and health insurance, looking at emergency savings, looking at budget and debt, looking at those big pictures. So I just realized I went on a tangent. Bring me back, Matt. What did you want me to talk about in particular? I'm just
No, you
going
did
on.
great. It's great. And it's very, very important information. And I think that, kind of hearing the journey that you had to walk through, and how how you think about your participants, and why all of this makes sense, to you to spend your time on, and how it's helpful. That's why we're here. One of the things you said, and I'm curious, I don't think we've ever talked about this before, you and I, is the data piece is obviously essential. If you're going to understand any gaps, you have to have the data. You mentioned Pearl. We have about 3 million participants in our Pearl database. We have somewhere in the range of 92% gender data. So we know, you mentioned the paper that we did on male female. We didn't do one on auto-enrollment male female, but I think, auto-enroll plans versus not auto-enroll plans, we'll put that on the list. But we don't have, we've asked for it for several years. We asked the record keepers and we say, hey, if you have ethnicity data, if you have race data, please send it to us, and we can study that. Almost to a plan, they all say that's not something we have. So for Beth, for your plan, was that data you already had, or did you have to go get it? Was that something you had to seek out from a different department, or was that already built in?
That was set up before I came in. My understanding was that we did that enhancement in terms of that additional data point. I don't believe we were capturing it previously, but because we had set it up, and that was something that we were specifically trying to goal set, orientate ourselves towards, and then looking at it through the lens of the auto enrollment. That's why we started to capture that data. Right. And I know that I've talked to other plan sponsors that they seem like there might be an impediment or some resistance. So again, it's just working with your legal. It's trying to understand what are the concerns, what are the risks. And anytime I run into an obstacle, if we want to pursue something and we find an obstacle, the biggest ally that all of us have is each other. Like, find another plan that's doing it, and don't reinvent the wheel, and figure out, how did you guys get there? What are you guys doing? So it definitely can be done. It might be something new and out of the box, and there might be resistance, but again, I think if you can stress aggregate data and what's being passed along, I think that's important, especially with the Pearl piece. You're not specifically giving data points per individual, but the aggregate piece.
Yeah. I've talked to a lot of sponsors about this, because I to your point, I feel like they fall into a few camps, right? Some sponsors will say we don't have it, or it's not easily available. But what I've been seeing more recently, especially now that we have like this data set, is we can show, here's the new lens that you get to see if we can get the data. And sometimes the benefits head, or the head of the group that we're talking to, doesn't have the data, but someone else in the organization does, or they don't realize they do. And so if you get this type of research into the hands of the right sort of executive folks that may actually be able to get the data, or might create a data strategy where you could source it in the future, we're seeing a lot more success there in showing, you get this if you give this back to us. Because at the end of the day, we're only as good as the data that we have. And to your point about the Pearl, we'd love to give the Pearl more data. We need this group and others and your peers to work with us to kind of make that case that we will hold this data in high regard and high security. That I've had so many privacy and security discussions. You know, we jump through all those hoops, appropriately so, by the way. And then we get to a point where it's like, okay, we trust you with the data because we're already sending you a lot of sensitive data. Now let's just put it into the plan to execute. And I'll say everybody is at a different place of this journey. Beth happens and her predecessor happened to be, like, I'll say, very early thinkers and adopters of automating this type of data to us. Most of the clients were just having these discussions now. So if you're not sending data like this to your record keeper, you're not alone. Oh, go ahead, Beth.
So Tom, I just checked the Q&A. Margaret Dawn, my predecessor that we keep referring to, she's on this, and good to see Maggie. So she made a couple salient points I just want to reiterate here. And she is an attorney as well. She's actually corp counsel for Milwaukee County right now. That's how I got to take over for her. So she wanted me to make clear to the group that there's absolutely no legal reason not to track or capture demographic data. I don't know if there is on a state or local level, but specific to that broader picture, but even post affirmative action decision with the Supreme Court. So she just wanted me to put that out there. So thank you, Maggie.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are some plans out there who can't, or don't acquire it, or just don't. But I think it is important to first ask, is this something we are allowed to do? And I think for the most part, at least generally, broadly, the answer is yes. So very important. And like we said, there, once you start to, as Tom mentioned, once you get the data, then you can start to break it down in as many ways as you want and start to pick it apart and figure out how to create solutions. And I think Beth's plan and Maggie's plan, really does highlight where you can be successful. So Angela, we've seen from the data that Tom and Beth have discussed that auto-enrollment can be used as a tool to shrink gaps. In the big picture, though, and Beth is one of our best for sure. She spends a lot of time on this kind of stuff. Why is it worth the time? And it's not, this isn't cost free. It's not effort free. This isn't just something that's going to take care of itself. From your side, from the provider side, why do you see that it's worth it? Having Tom go through all this data and Beth go through all this work to get this done.
Yeah, sure. There's a cost to everything, right? There's the cost of the individuals who are collecting the data, the ways in which it's transmitted. It's the Toms, it's the Beths, it's the Maggies, it's everyone's investment. It's going through sometimes the legal hoops and the administrative kind of operational back end things to do it. But then there's also the cost of not doing it. It's the cost of these gaps persisting. It's the cost of folks not actually taking full advantage of a savings plan, not reaching that match that they should. And those knock-on effects are to employee well-being, as we talked about, and just in terms of an employee's mental health and well-being, and productivity. I mean, all of these things actually have knock-on effects, not just in what happens in the workplace, but what happens in personal lives, in families, in communities. And so if we think about this as part of one of many tools that we need to start to address some gaps in terms of inequities, whether it's because of where someone is from geographically, or they are from a low-income family, perhaps they're from a family where there's a distrust of financial institutions and the whole premise of 401ks and savings plans, et cetera. So we have to do everything that we can to pull all of those various levers. One thing that I think is also important to think about is you're talking about the health of an economy. If you're thinking about public sector and you're thinking about the millions of employees that make up that public sector, that's significant. And with shifts in demographics, I think the rate is by, 2030, we're going to have some pretty significant shifts in demographics with an increase in Hispanic, Latino individuals within our communities. And right now we see that there is such a gap. And so, part of what I say is we can't always just think about the cost on one side. We've got to think about the cost on both. And why is it worth it? This is humbling work. To actually be part of influencing someone's kind of financial confidence, financial security, is really humbling work. And I think that's why, you find so many of us who talk about this as having the heart for this, because it's not just dollars and cents. That it's real people and real families that stand behind every single one of these plan participants. And so that's why it's worth it.
Yeah. And something interesting about the public sector, if you look at the BLS data, it's actually state and local government is actually a majority female workforce. It's a much higher rate of minority workforce. And so in this industry in particular, it's a much higher effect. There's a lot of literature on kind of the evening out effect that DB plans have, that public pensions have. But as you can see from Beth's plan, there's also a very significant impact that can be made on the DC side as well. And so, all around, like you're saying, all around in the total financial picture, there's a lot of ways that we can help people out. We're talking a lot about auto enrollment today on the DC side because Milwaukee put it in place and it worked. But Tom, we know that a lot of plans can't do that. As I said on the website, there's a lot of states that are not at all allowed to auto enroll. What else can you do? What other options are there to try to close some of these gaps if you can't just kind of passively get people in the plan?
Yeah, no, it's, and I get it, right? I actually have talked to many of those plan sponsors and states and government entities that can't take advantage of this provision right now. I think, first of all, don't give up. Use papers and research like this to keep trying. I know sometimes you've tried and it still fails, but keep trying. That said, in the meantime, and or in the absence of being able to get those auto features installed, there's a lot of things you can do. There's some research that we did actually last year where we just changed the way we ask people to think about savings. So I'll tell a quick story and then I'll get to the research. When I first started at State Street Bank here in Boston, right out of college in the contact center, I had very little money, I was still paying off my student loan debts. They were a lot smaller back then than they are now. But I still vividly remember a form I got when there's like a pack of paperwork when you were a new hire back then. One of the forms said salary reduction agreement. And that was literally the enrollment form for the retirement plan at a financial services company back then. And so I said, ooh, that looks like a whole bunch of fun. Sign me up for that salary reduction agreement. So my point is, now fast forward to the research we just did. We've come a long way. We don't call it a salary reduction agreement. At least I hope most of us don't anymore. We're electronic. We're talking about saving for your future. But we still think about things in like percentages. And frankly, many of those that we serve aren't math majors. They might not have gone to college. They might not have high financial literacy. They may have gone to college and we don't teach financial literacy in college or in high school. So we tried this concept of pennies per dollar instead of percent when people were proactively enrolling in the retirement plan website. And we found that those that are less numerate, less financially literate, they tend to have low to moderate income salaries. They would actually save more when we framed that savings decision as pennies per dollar versus percent. And so we deploy that to our website so that we help people in those low to moderate income buckets with a different way of thinking about the savings decision in the absence of plans where there's no automatic enrollment capability, because we're trying to meet them where they are and that sort of speak their language in more relatable terms. What I would say, though, to the entire audience is even if you're not taking advantage of Voya services and using this research, you can use that type of language with your employees now. So if you're reaching out, if you have on-site education, or if you're sending out an email or even a piece of paper, maybe, think about the language and the framing of those words that we use and how much they really matter. In that context, we got people to save almost a whole percentage point more just by reframing that language differently. So that's an idea. There's many ideas out there in terms of how to better meet people, how to frame language. use defaults appropriately, even when we don't have that automatic enrollment setting in place.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about active choice. There are ways to do it. It's a much more difficult if you don't have auto enrollment in place, but still very much worth the effort.
Yeah, can I just say one more thing I actually forgot? So one other thing that I would suggest is, actually, we did this just at Voya last week. So I had a chance to meet with our Black, African American, Hispanic, and Latino councils. So at Voya, some call them employee resource groups. We have councils. That community showed up strong to say, hey, what are we looking like? How are the results here at Voya? And we really leaned into a very real discussion. It was a discussion just like today. People were coming on camera though and saying, hey, tell me more about this. Why? I don't understand what the match really means to me. Why is it that we're not taking advantage of that? And so sometimes it's just a really have it real discussion with the employees in your organization. I know sometimes they're spread out all over the place. That's the cool thing. As much as the pandemic was really horrible, many folks are now connected digitally and through media like this. So have those discussions with your employees, show them that they're not taking advantage of these benefits, the employer match or the other benefits and programs that you're offering as an employer, and then just have a discussion with them. We found that in our plan, even though we have automatic enrollment and rate escalation, some people weren't taking advantage of those things anymore because they've been here for a number of years and they weren't getting part of the re-enrollment program. So we showed them how to sign up for future savings rate escalation on their own. And now we're seeing a higher adoption. We showed them how to use as budgeting tools. So there's things that I think you can do now that will really help and just start that open dialogue with these communities in advance of hopefully being able to, as Beth likes to say, use the power tool that is the auto features.
Hey, and can I just add, so that was one of our best attended webinars that Tom hosted with those councils. Very robust, lots of conversation, lots of follow-on. And so sometimes it literally is just, as Tom said, it's having those real conversations, a break in time. Because as much as we'd all like to pretend that people read our emails and they focus on what's in their benefits enrollment and they read the descriptors, sometimes it's just hearing other people who you also know are smart people say, I don't know what this is all about. Can you help me figure it out? I think just makes all the difference in the world. And it also provides to our employees a real tangible proof that we actually care about their financial futures. We care about their well-being, and we're going to invest in the time to have some really serious conversations to help support them.
I think that's a great point. And I want to kind of use that, that communication element to bridge to some of the questions that we got. So we don't have a lot of time for questions. We're kind of getting towards the end. But we got a question about if you're trying to get auto enrollment, and if you're trying to work on, getting an auto enrollment, either law passed or auto enrollment added to your plan. We had some questions about unions and whether in Milwaukee you saw any pushback from the unions or from any employee groups beforehand. It was probably more Maggie at the time, but was that a big element of the effort to get through, auto enrollment through, and were you either involved in that, or do you remember any of the details of how that might have played out at the time?
So on that front, we were fortunate on one level, not fortunate on others, but we had the state law legislation enacted in 2011, I believe, Act 10. And that basically was the union busting act for everybody but police and fire. So when it came to the auto enrollment feature and putting it into our plan design, we didn't have to work with any of the unions other than fire and police. And we decided, because for a couple of reasons, we didn't even touch it. So we do not do auto enrollment with fire and police. They actually do a great job with their percentages and encouraging their populations to engage and to engage early and often. So we work with them in a different way, a different capacity. And I will tell you, for example, and what's unique about having fire and police is that they have most of their new employees come through their new sworn classes. So they work with like fresh lumps of clay, at least in the city of Milwaukee, younger employees. So we go to their recruit classes, and we actually decided it's better to go old school. We bring paper enrollment forms. So it's kind of easier. And we try to give them the tools ahead of time. We give them the plan highlights. We tell them about their options. And then we follow up and we say, okay, we're going to come back and we're going to set up some on-site consultation opportunities for you. And in some cases, because they're younger, we work with some of their parents as well. So we didn't have that uphill battle. Now, I know the state of California is, for an example, they have a big uphill battle. But my understanding is that they are trying to do collective bargaining conversations specific to 457 plans, utilizing this narrative as to how this is going to impact DEI, which every state's different in terms of being receptive to that conversation. But as we all are aware, California is ripe for that discussion. So they're actually being super creative by saying, let's look at it from this perspective. And we all are trying to impact and address this. And oh, by the way, here's a way we can do that. So let's find a way to get on board to make this happen so we can have this end result.
Yeah, and Maggie did chime in on the Q&A that a lot of the unions were very pro auto enrollment, and what we've seen on with some other plans that I've talked to is that if you can get a couple interested in it and get a couple who are on board with it, then the other ones look at it and go, hey, wait a minute, if they get auto enrollment, why don't I get auto enrollment? I want that because they have it. And so it can kind of be a cascading effect in a positive direction. Instead of just, kind of the other perspective we've seen is like, oh, this is the foot in the door of taking away our DB plan, which I very much try to counter at the national level. And I hope all of you are working to counter as well at the local level. We got one, I think we have time for one more question. And I don't know if you have a good answer for this one, Beth. It's from Tom Meyer in Delaware. First of all, he said he loves Tom Armstrong, so I'm gonna give that one a shout out to Tom from the state of Delaware, the first state that loves Tom Armstrong. But it's a question about cash out. So they have a involuntary force out provision for anybody with a balance under $1,000. So I think the concern is you auto enroll somebody. And then they build up a balance of a few $100. They leave a couple of years later, and then you cash them out. You're trying to build a program that's getting them ready for retirement. How are you thinking about that kind of trade-off in your plan? And Tom or Angela, if some of your other clients are facing that, please chime in as well.
I mean, I would just say money's fungible. So if there is a force out provision in your plan, I mean, so what? You're helping them save money, and hopefully they can use that as an emergency savings or to roll into their next employment plan. You're still helping them save, and you're still helping them with that bigger picture. And I know one thing we were going to talk about too, again, I can't emphasize enough the capacity that this allows you to have if you do auto enrollment. The thing that we really want to focus on next is with the Secure 2.0 provisions, the emergency savings, because especially, and Tom, heads up, I'm going to reach out to you about this, but for our lower income employees, I really want to start crunching the data. And we kind of had a preview when it came to CARES Act, right? We had an opportunity for people to take loans based off of financial duress. So I feel like for a lot of people who start saving and don't even realize that they're missing it through the auto enrollment process, when they start to say, I really need access to some cash, well, guess what? It's there. And if with the Secure 2.0, they can take that $1,000 loan and then pay it back to themselves, for some people, that can mean the difference of going bankrupt or not. And to me, I think that if we can help people stave off of that downward spiral so that they can, like, once they get back on their feet, start going in the right direction. And again, it's partly through education, it's partly through working and partnering with them and getting in front of them and having them think about things from different perspectives. To me, it's all part of the end goal, and that's helping people.
Yeah, and I agree, unless I know we're at time, but just it's a multi-dimensional problem, right? Like, we actually do need to help people build up this financial cushion. If they're changing jobs and not able to build up, and then also not saving, it's a problem. So I completely get the question too. I will say the Secure Act 2.0, which I think John might have even alluded to in his question, does allow you to at least extend the force out to 7K instead of 5K. So that will help a bit. But I think to your point, to Beth's comment earlier about money being fungible, at least there's something there that can be tapped into. Admittedly, then the next frontier is some of the emergency savings provisions to prevent that force out. We've seen in past data studies here at Voya that people without adequate emergency savings are 13 times more likely to take a hardship withdrawal from their plan. And that's an irreversible, right now at least, irreversible decision. You can't put the money back. With these new provisions, there's at least some flexibility to get money back into the plan through some of these new optional provisions. So we're excited about that.
Yeah, and I'll tee up some future Pearl research that we're going to do on loans and how they're being used as well. But we are out of time, so I am going to cut it off there. One thing I will say before all of you go is that we are going to put up the slides from the studies that were referenced here, Beth's plan, the Voya study, so that you have some more information and some stuff beyond what you might have seen in the presentation today. So much more to follow. Angela, Tom, Beth, really appreciate you making the time to come out, and all of you for attending. I think this was really great. So thanks a lot, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.